Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. Alright, here it goes. It happened 2 years ago, on one of those heavy Mondays when the sky feels like it's pressing down on the office roof. I remember the smell of burnt coffee in the break room, the low hum of the printer that never stopped, and the way everyone seemed to avoid my eyes that morning. It was as if they knew something I didn't, or maybe, deep down, I already knew. My name's Laura. I was 52 then, working as an assistant manager at a mid-sized construction company. I'd been there for almost 15 years. I'd seen bosses come and go, watched the company struggle through recessions, and yet, I always thought I was safe, reliable, the kind of worker people count on. But that morning, there was something different about my boss, Mark. Normally, he'd pass by my desk with a polite nod or a quick "morning, Laura." But that day, he didn't even glance in my direction. He just walked straight into his office, shut the door, and stayed there for hours. By noon, I couldn't focus on anything. I was pretending to type up a report, but my hands were shaking slightly. I had a feeling, no, a certainty, that he was going to let me go. Maybe I was too old, too slow with the new digital systems they'd started using. Maybe they wanted someone younger, someone who could multitask and smile at the same time. When his email popped up on my screen, "Can you step into my office for a few minutes?" I felt my stomach drop. I stood outside his door for a few seconds, gathering myself. The door creaked when I knocked, and his deep voice came from the other side. "Come in." Mark was sitting behind his desk, his sleeves rolled up, tie slightly loosened. There were papers spread everywhere, and the afternoon light came through the blinds in narrow lines that cut across his face. He looked tired. "Older than usual, Laura," he said, motioning to the chair opposite him. "Please, have a seat." I sat down, my heart pounding in my ears. He sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and then looked at me with this expression that was hard to read. "You've been with us for a long time," he began slowly. "And I want to start by saying how much I appreciate your dedication. You've carried this team through some rough times." There was a but coming. I could feel it hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. "But the company's been struggling lately. We're restructuring some departments. The board wants new direction, new energy." He hesitated, and that was when I knew. "You're letting me go," I said softly. He exhaled, almost in relief that I'd said it first. "I'm afraid we have to make some difficult decisions. It's nothing personal. You've done great work, truly." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the framed picture behind him, his family, smiling by a lake somewhere. I could almost hear the wind in that photo, the calmness of it, the distance from everything that was happening here. But something inside me shifted. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was that I'd spent too many years quietly accepting things that weren't fair. Either way, I wasn't going to leave that room defeated. I straightened in my chair. "Mark," I said, "before you finalize anything, let me show you something." He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "Show me something?" "Yes," I said firmly. "You think I'm outdated? That's fine. Maybe I don't talk in buzzwords, or type as fast as the new kids. But I know this company inside and out. I know the clients, their moods, what they need before they even ask for it. Give me 2 weeks, just 2, and let me prove I'm still valuable." He looked at me for a long time, drumming his fingers on the desk. There was a silence between us, not uncomfortable but thick with thought. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and said quietly, 2 weeks. "What do you have in mind?" That's when I told him about the old client list. For months, I'd been reviewing records of inactive accounts, companies that had worked with us years ago but stopped after management changed. I'd been calling them, slowly rebuilding connections. Quietly. On my own time. I'd managed to re-establish contact with 3 big ones, but I hadn't told anyone yet. "I think I can bring them back," I said. "And if I do, maybe you'll see I'm not finished here." Mark's expression softened, but he didn't say much. "All right, Laura," he said at last. 2 weeks. Show me what you can do." As I left his office, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. They didn't know if I'd been fired or saved. I wasn't sure either. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone had gone home. The lights from the city glowed outside the window, reflecting off the papers on my desk. It felt strange, half hope, half fear, but I couldn't stop now. I dialed the first number on my list, and when the voice on the other end answered, I felt my hand steady. "Hi, this is Laura from Wexford Construction. We worked together years ago. How have you been?" There was a pause, then a warm laugh. "Laura, I remember you. You kept us sane during that bridge project." And just like that, a spark of something familiar returned. Not just confidence, but purpose. For the next few days, I lived and breathed those calls. I reconnected with old clients, listened to their frustrations, offered solutions, even drafted new proposals on my own. It was exhausting, but also strangely exhilarating. Every morning, I'd catch Mark watching me through his office window, that same unreadable expression on his face. Maybe he was surprised. Maybe he was rethinking everything. By Friday, I had news. One of the clients had agreed to meet again, to reopen their contract discussions. I printed the confirmation email and walked it straight into Mark's office. He looked up as I entered, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "What's this?" he asked. "Proof," I said, smiling faintly. "That I'm not done surprising you yet." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Laura. Let's see where this goes." And as I left the room, something in the air had changed. The tension wasn't gone, but it had turned into something else. Respect, maybe. I didn't know how the next week would go, but for the first time in a long while, I felt alive again. The following week felt like walking a tightrope over an invisible canyon. Each morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, the streets still damp from a light drizzle that made the city shine under the streetlights. I carried my little notebook with client notes, emails, and ideas, almost like a talisman against failure. Mark didn't say much at first, but there was a noticeable change in the way he glanced at me. Instead of that detached, guarded look, there was curiosity now, almost as if he were watching a test unfold, and he didn't know whether it would succeed or collapse. I started by prioritizing the clients who had once been the company's backbone. I sent personalized messages, not generic emails. I reminded them of past projects, small victories, even recalling personal anecdotes I remembered from years before. Surprisingly, many responded warmly. Some were skeptical, of course, but a few were intrigued enough to schedule calls. During one afternoon call, I could feel the tension in my chest dissolve. The client, a man named Mr. Simmons, had been frustrated with past delays and miscommunication. I listened. Really listened. And instead of just pitching solutions, I acknowledged the problems. I admitted the mistakes without excuses and suggested tangible improvements. By the end of the conversation, he laughed, almost like we'd known each other all our lives. "Laura, I didn't expect this," he said. "I'm looking forward to working with Wexford again, if you're leading the charge." I almost didn't believe it. I had expected resistance, hesitation, maybe polite dismissals. Instead, there was trust, real trust, and it shook me. Not because I doubted my skills, but because I hadn't realized just how much I had undervalued them myself. Mark noticed the change too. That afternoon, he stopped by my desk with a cup of coffee. "Simmons called," he asked, his voice a mix of skepticism and something softer, approval. "Maybe, yes," I said, trying not to let the excitement in my voice give away how relieved I felt. "And he's open to a renewed contract. He wants to meet next week to discuss details." Mark nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this. I smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the caffeine. "Neither was I said. The week continued like this: calls, emails, follow-ups, proposals. I was tired in a way that went deeper than muscle or sleep deprivation. This was emotional exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. Every small victory reinforced something I'd almost forgotten: my capability, my resilience, and my understanding of people. One evening, late Thursday, the office was empty except for me. The quiet hum of computers and the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights made the space feel different, intimate almost, as if the building itself were holding its breath. I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen and realized that I'd managed to revive 3 major clients in just a few days, and then, unexpectedly, Mark appeared at my side. He had that unreadable expression again, but this time, it carried a hint of respect. "Laura," he said quietly, "I didn't realize you had this in you." I turned to him, meeting his gaze. Neither did I admitted. There was a long pause, filled only with the faint buzz of electronics and the distant city noises outside. Then he said something that surprised me even more. "You've reminded me what I almost forgot too." I raised an eyebrow, unsure what he meant. "You've shown me that experience, patience, and knowing people, it still matters," he continued. "Not just speed or shiny new systems." I misjudged the situation. I felt something like relief, but stronger, deeper. It wasn't just about keeping my job anymore. It was about being seen not as someone replaceable, but as a person whose knowledge, instincts, and care truly counted. The next morning, I walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. People noticed the change in me, the way I carried myself, the confidence in my voice during calls, the calm determination in my eyes. Even colleagues who had been distant started asking questions, seeking advice, or simply sharing small smiles in passing. By the end of the week, Mark called me into his office again. This time, there was no tension. He handed me a folder with the signed agreements from the 3 clients I'd managed to reconnect with. "Consider this your official win," he said. "Not just for the company, but for yourself." I held the folder carefully, as if it were fragile, feeling an unexpected swell of pride. It wasn't just about surviving a firing, it was about proving something to myself that I hadn't realized I needed to prove, that experience, dedication, and the quiet persistence of a steady hand still mattered. As I left his office, the city sunlight streamed through the window blinds, casting narrow stripes of gold across my desk. It felt different now, like the space itself was acknowledging a small victory, not just for me, but for the invisible threads of effort, courage, and quiet strategy that had made it possible. Walking back to my desk, I thought about how unpredictable life can be. One moment, you're standing at the edge, fearing a fall. The next, you're discovering a strength you didn't fully recognize. And sometimes, the people around you, those you might have thought would judge or overlook you, turn out to be witnesses to your resilience. Quietly respecting the journey that week didn't just save my job. It shifted something inside me. A reminder that setbacks are temporary, but understanding your own worth, that can change everything. The following weeks became a rhythm I hadn't expected, steady, demanding, but somehow satisfying. Each morning, the city greeted me with its usual chaos, yet I felt a strange calm amidst the rush. The streets that once seemed crowded and overwhelming now felt alive with opportunity, each passerby a reminder of the small, interconnected world I had quietly navigated for years. Mark had shifted too. He no longer hovered or cast those skeptical glances my way. Instead, he gave me space, intervening only when needed, and occasionally offering a nod or quiet acknowledgement that felt heavier with meaning than words could carry. It was as if the balance between us had subtly changed, not boss and employee, but partners in a silent understanding that the work mattered because we respected each other's contributions. One afternoon, I found myself alone in the conference room, reviewing proposals for a particularly tricky client who had been hesitant for months. The sunlight fell across the polished table, creating a pattern of shadows that danced with the papers I had spread out. I could hear the faint clatter of keyboards and distant phone conversations, the rhythm of an office alive and humming. My phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the revived clients. "Laura, I've just reviewed the new proposal. I'm impressed. Let's meet next week to finalize everything." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That was the 4th in just a few weeks. Not just surviving, but thriving. Mark appeared at the door, leaning casually against the frame. "Looks like you've outdone yourself again," he said quietly. I smiled, though my hands were still trembling slightly from the excitement. "I couldn't have done it without knowing what mattered to each of them," I said. "It's about listening, understanding." He nodded, stepping inside the room. For the first time, I noticed a subtle vulnerability in his posture. The fast-paced, assertive facade he always wore was softened here, as if he recognized in me something he'd been missing in himself: a patience, a quiet determination, a deeper connection to the people we worked for. "You know," he said, almost to himself, "I wasn't sure you'd handle this. But you have. And in the process, you've reminded me of what real leadership looks like." His words caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting praise or acknowledgement, certainly not in this personal tone. "Mark, thank you," I said softly. "That means a lot coming from you." There was a pause. Then he tilted his head slightly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You've changed how I see things here. And not just me, I think the whole team has noticed. They respect you, Laura. More than you probably realize." I felt a warmth that wasn't just pride, it was something deeper, a recognition that the struggle, the uncertainty, had led to growth that neither of us had anticipated. I had faced the fear of being dismissed, of losing everything I'd worked for, and I had discovered a resilience I didn't know I had. That evening, I stayed late again, finalizing the last few client details. The office was silent, the kind of quiet that feels almost sacred after a long day. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline, the lights flickering like 1,000 small stars suspended over the streets. It struck me how much the world could feel both immense and intimate at the same time. Mark's voice broke the quiet. "Still here?" I turned to see him standing behind me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one, and for a moment, we simply stood there, looking out over the city together. No words were necessary. The shared understanding between us was palpable, 2 people who had navigated challenges, who had seen strength emerge from pressure, and who recognized the quiet courage it took to persevere. "You've surprised me more than you'll ever know," he said finally, his tone low but genuine. "And you've surprised me too," I replied. "Not just with letting me prove myself, but with trusting me enough to see it through." He nodded, and I could see a flicker of something almost human in his expression: relief, respect, perhaps even admiration. It was a moment suspended in time, one that wouldn't need to be repeated to be remembered. The following days were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and careful planning, but I carried with me a quiet confidence that wasn't dependent on outcomes or approvals. I had discovered that my worth wasn't just measured by numbers or deadlines, it was in the persistence, the care, and the courage to face uncertainty head on. By the end of the month, the client contracts were finalized, each one a tangible testament to the value of experience, attention, and genuine effort. Walking through the office that day, I noticed the subtle changes: colleagues offering small smiles, team members pausing to ask questions, Mark giving a quiet nod as I passed by his office. Respect had been earned, not demanded, and it carried weight that surpassed anything I had anticipated. As I sat at my desk that evening, looking over the completed agreements, I realized that this experience had reshaped not just my role in the company, but my understanding of myself. Fear had pushed me to act, to innovate quietly, to reconnect with what truly mattered. And in the process, I had found a strength that would stay with me long after the contracts were signed, long after the office lights were turned off. That night, as I walked home, the city lights reflecting softly on the wet pavement, I felt a sense of gratitude I hadn't felt in years. Not just for the job, but for the reminder that growth often comes in unexpected ways, and that sometimes, the people we least expect to understand us, end up seeing our true worth. The weeks that followed felt like a gentle unfolding, as if the pressure of the previous months had opened something inside me that had been dormant for too long. The contracts were finalized, the clients were satisfied, and the office settled into a rhythm that was at once familiar and invigorating. But the real change wasn't in the external validation, it was in how I carried myself. Mark had shifted, too. The tension that once lingered in our interactions had given way to a steady, unspoken respect. He no longer needed to hover, check, or question. Instead, he trusted the decisions I made, occasionally offering advice but mostly letting me navigate the challenges with the same quiet confidence that had surprised him in the first place. One late afternoon, I found myself alone in the office, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the carpet. I was reviewing reports, but my mind wandered, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The fear of losing my job, the frantic effort to reconnect with clients, the late nights and the quiet victories, it all seemed like a distant memory now, yet one that had left a permanent mark. Mark appeared quietly at the doorway, holding a stack of papers. He didn't interrupt, just leaned against the frame, watching me for a moment. "Laura," he said finally, his tone low but steady, "I've been thinking." I looked up, curiosity mingling with a residual caution. About this entire past month," he said, stepping into the room. "I've realized something. Watching you handle everything, it's reminded me that leadership isn't about power or control. It's about understanding, patience, and trusting the people who are willing to fight for what they believe in." I smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I've learned that too," I said. Not just about work, but about myself. About what I can do when I stop doubting my own worth. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You've not only saved your position, Laura, you've reminded all of us what really matters. And I want to thank you for that. There was a quiet intimacy in that moment, not in a romantic sense, but in the way two people can recognize each other's growth and struggle. The kind of connection that doesn't need words to affirm respect and mutual understanding. The following days brought a sense of calm purpose. I continued to nurture client relationships, guide the team, and contribute to new projects, but the fear that had once dominated my thoughts had vanished. It had been replaced by a quiet strength, a trust in myself, and an appreciation for the journey that had brought me here. One Friday evening, as the office emptied and the city lights shimmered through the windows, Mark called me into his office. I walked in, expecting another discussion about numbers or projections, but instead, he gestured to the view outside. Look at this, he said softly. The city never stops moving, but sometimes we need to pause and notice the small victories. I leaned against the window, taking in the glowing streets below. And I realized he was right, not just about the city, but about life itself. The small, quiet victories, the moments of perseverance and trust, often carried the most weight. Mark looked at me, and in that gaze, I saw acknowledgement, respect, and something deeper, a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for something meaningful. You've changed things here, Laura, he said. Not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. I nodded, feeling a sense of completeness I hadn't expected. And I've changed too, I replied. I've learned that fear can be a teacher, and resilience can open doors we didn't know existed. As I left his office and walked back to my desk, the last rays of sunlight caught the edges of the building, painting the walls in gold. I paused for a moment, letting the quiet satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't just a story about keeping a job, it was about discovering strength, fostering respect, and finding a deeper connection to the world and the people in it. That night, as I stepped out into the streets and felt the gentle breeze on my face, I understood something vital. Life's most profound lessons often come disguised as challenges. And when we meet them with courage, integrity, and heart, we emerge not only stronger but wiser, and with a renewed appreciation for the unexpected ways in which we can surprise ourselves and those around us. And as I walked home, I smiled, knowing that this chapter of my life would stay with me forever, a testament to perseverance, respect, and the quiet power of proving one's worth. The story had started with fear, but it ended with discovery of myself, of my strength, and of the deep, mutual respect that can emerge when we face uncertainty. Head-on. It was a victory in every sense that mattered.